Fahrenheit 9/11, a documentary from 2004, written and directed by Michael Moore. The log line from IMDb: Michael Moore's view on what happened to the United States after September 11th and how the Bush administration allegedly used the tragic events to push forward its agenda for unjust wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I would remove the word allegedly from this. I'm actually going to IMDb today and try to edit that because that's inaccurate. Yeah, this film is important to me in a lot of different ways, and I think especially with views on America. I grew up, in the 80s and 90s, so I would turn 18 around 2000. And really became like more, actually you're involved in politics, you can vote. So I was always political in this, even as a kid, but this is when it really ignited the political side of myself around this time. And especially the Iraq war specifically, and the September 11th attacks. And even this film starts with the 2000 election, which George Bush stole illegally. And that was the first election I voted in, and immediately saw, okay, well, this system clearly doesn't work because the winner just stepped aside for this other guy who was appointed by the Supreme Court to lead us. Like, that's fishy and this is no good. So I was immediately becoming jaded, like in my first election, seeing it be a stolen one, which what this movie, I think starting there is good in terms of what it covers. But definitely the Iraq war is something that I was against from the beginning. As a college kid, I sort of saw through, the lies of what was trying to, the Bush administration was trying to do. And I think this movie does a very good job of kind of building the case for why that, that war was illegal and was wrong. And I was always also a huge fan of Michael Moore for a very long time. There was a show he had on Fox called TV Nation that I watched as like a very young kid. Maybe I was like 13, 14. And that was my first exposure to him. And I was like, oh, I love this guy. Like, I love how he's using, humor to make political points. I would buy all of his books and read them and see his movies. But this one for me, just because of it really captured the mood that I felt at the time to America. Like I said, I have a troubled relationship with this country for sure. And this is definitely a movie that represents, encapsulates a lot of the problems that I do have with our country, the things that we've done, using our power for evil instead of good. What can happen when, evil people are put in charge of, the most powerful country in the world. What they can rot on other nations is very alarming. So I think, this movie is, Michael Moore does a great job of, showing the downsides of a democracy, because democracy is, the people deciding things, and sometimes the people are wrong. Sometimes they're hoodwinked by their leaders who are tricking them, which is what happened here. I mean, I was in the minority of people at the time who was very much against, the war, even in college. And I remember, not necessarily, it was sometimes hard to kind of speak out about it because you felt that was, being anti-American. It was actually, I studied abroad in the UK during this time. And it was after the war had already started, but that was the place I was able to feel the most free to criticize America, and even participated in this major protest in Trafalgar Square. It was actually kind of cool. They set up a statue of George W. Bush that we all got to tear down, like the Saddam Hussein tear down thing, like chanting, like, we want America to stop. And that, it's funny. Like, I felt more like of an American in terms of expressing my freedom of speech and my dislike for what the country is doing, being abroad, than I even did in the country, just because of the mood that was going on at the time, which, is actually a pretty amazing Michael Moore. I mean, not amazing, but I think a good side of America is we have a country where, even though we're doing these evil things and the government is evil and everything, a filmmaker can still make and release this movie. Other countries with dictators or systems of government, he wouldn't have been allowed. Maybe would have been put in jail. But this movie did come out. Or worse, yeah. This movie did come out. It was a gigantic blockbuster sensation. Grossed still the #1 highest grossing documentary of all time by leaps and bounds. It was a phenomenon when this came out. So I saw this film twice in the theaters. And I remember the first time I saw it, it's a very moving film about all the things that, that is going on, especially with the U.S. soldiers. And like my girlfriend at the time, like she cried after the end of the movie. And there was this other woman sitting next to us who was like bawling, and her son had been killed in Iraq.
Oh no.
And she would just like, basically like, I can't, it's sort of like her eyes were open for the first time to be like, wow, he died literally for nothing. And, we had, I was there comforting her, like, yeah, like this is horrible. Like, he did die for nothing. But just seeing that sacrifice that her son gave for no reason just made me even more angry. I just remember like, how can, we be sacrificing all of our soldiers for no reason, for this lie that the Bush administration had put on the world. So, I think, again, it was even hard for me, honestly, to go back and watch this film. Like I couldn't get through a lot of it because it just makes me so angry. And brings me back to this time period of like the early 2000s, like after, 9/11, and just what the United States wrought on the world after those events were just absolutely horrifying. And it just still makes me mad to think about it. And just puts me in a very angry mindset to even go back to that time. So it was hard to rewatch this, but I still think it's incredibly effective. Michael Moore is just an incredible filmmaker. How he sets up the cast of villains in the beginning, showing them sort of getting ready for the camera. You introduce each of the, the people in the Bush administration, and it's clear he's trying to say, these people are just putting on a show for people, the American citizens, and lying to them because they're all actors pretending that Iraq was a threat and that they had these weapons and that we were right to go in there, which we clearly didn't. So yeah, I think this movie is very important to me in my relationship to the United States, even to this day.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine watching this movie when it came out, being in this country, given everything that was happening. I had not watched this movie until, in preparation for this podcast in its full length. I'd seen bits and pieces of it. Obviously, familiar with everything that sort of went down. But it was hard watching it for sure. Because it's not only all this for nothing, but also everything that happened with 9/11 was also brought about by the same people, you know? So it's just very troubling and twisted in that sense. And it took me back to that time when I was still in India and thinking about, what has happened? What does this mean for the world? How can a thing like this even happen in the US, which up till that point was sort of touted sort of as invincible, like nothing could happen. So in India, we've always had this sort of thing with Pakistan and, all sorts of war things, and my dad being in the army. So it's sort of been in the culture, and to then see that happen and at such a grand scale over there. And then months and months and years of, I remember reports of, oh, they're looking for this and they found something, or they didn't find something, or blah, blah, blah. It was always sort of this background chatter on all news channels all the time. I remember, no matter where you lived. And I just remember sort of having this sinking feeling that, is this how civilization is going to end? That we'll just keep sending people trying to find stuff. So yeah, which doesn't exist. So yeah, troubling to watch the movie. But like you said, the movie is very effective. I do think watching the movie for the first time in its entirety now, given what we know about documentary filmmaking and such, though effective, it's also a little cartoony in a way. And maybe that's by design. I don't know. Like if this movie was made today, I think its tone and such and feel would be a lot different. I think it'll be grimmer. It'll be hard hitting, but maybe that's to its credit that it sort of sneaks up on you. It sort of feels kind of cartoony. It's explained in a very sort of dumbed down, brought down way, which is probably the point, to make it, reach as far as it possibly can, make it very effective. They aren't kind of, hard to follow storytelling devices being used. It's a very simple storytelling kind of that he uses, and often cartoony, like I said, but very effective regardless.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely been his style. And again, I think maybe why as a young kid of like 12, 13, I gravitated towards him and his TV shows and how he talks about politics and talks about issues. There is he definitely can get very serious. And there's moments in this movie that are very, hard to watch and serious, but because of that light tone and that comedic tone that he can put weaving throughout the rest of it, it is like an entertaining watch in terms of how he portrays, even the bad guys in this movie, like Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld. There is sort of like a silliness to it. And two, I think, his style of filmmaking, and definitely changed documentaries forever. I mean, to your point, in terms of if this was made today, I feel like there's so many movies that have come out after this, like documentaries, that basically are cribbing his style. That because this movie was such a hit, that it's like going back to the genesis of a new form of how documentaries have evolved in the last 20 years. Going back to that, the point that, this and Bowling for Columbine too. I think that movie is also a huge hit, though not as big as this one. But I think his style is now this style. So it's interesting to go back and see the genesis of that. One other thing I will say too that was interesting in rewatching this is, the parts that I could get through it without feeling too just sad and depressed is something I actually didn't realize at the time when I saw it, is that it's very US centric. And maybe again, it was because you're in the middle of the war that was still being fought. The second half is about how the horrible cost of the war, but mainly on Americans. Oh, here's some sad moms whose kids are dead. Here's American soldiers that are wounded. And yeah, obviously that is sad, but there is no mention of the toll that we put on the Iraqi people. I mean, close to 1 million people we killed over there official estimates, a couple 100,000, but there's also estimates of over 1 million. And there's no mention of that. It's almost like the tone of the film is, oh, this is a horrible thing that Bush did because of what he inflicted on like Americans. And it's really, to me, and as I've evolved my thinking to be a little more international in the last 10 to 15 years too, and looking at America and kind of taking a step back, it's like the toll is way worse on the rest of the world. Totally. Like, yeah, again, it's sad that soldiers died, but we started the war. And these are soldiers that signed up to go and fight in this war,
and they're from everywhere.
The Iraqi people did not sign up for this. They're innocent civilians getting killed by soldiers on purpose a lot of the times, in terms of the war crimes that we committed over there. And like it's just interesting that the movie doesn't really mention or put any focus on the pain we inflicted on Iraq. So in a way, I feel like maybe if the film was made today, that would be more of the coverage, or maybe Michael Moore's lens is just very US centric.
That's the thing. And that's probably a little bit of what I see him as. Like, it's a little bit of like gotcha kind of attitude, which I don't know, as much as I found the movie very effective and him also very effective, but there is a part of me that views him in that kind of gotcha kind of way, which makes it a little bit almost selfish in a way,
or immature. It's like immature
from his point of view, and he comes off as a little silly and clownish. And first of all, don't show yourself in a documentary. I don't actually want to. There's no point.
That's his style.
That's his thing. I get it all adds to that, and I think it's connected to what you're saying, that if somebody mature were making this, it'll have like a broader point of view. That said, though, this movie was made in the thick of its time, right? So it's hard to kind of point fingers at somebody that, oh, you just made this about here. I get it.
Right.
Because it was in the thick of it, and America was on the hot seat, So, yeah.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.